Would an invasion of Russia into Ukraine benefit China? Or would it be a headache? Why would they want this, or why would they not want this? And why have they signed a joint statement, Russia and China together, to basically stand as partners? What's all this, and will this create a new world order? Things we should really know. Now, I'm not a Russia expert or Ukrainian expert, but I can tell you something about the position that I believe China has with these tensions building up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, do so now, would really appreciate it. This is my 100th video online, so I have to celebrate this, and there's many, many more to come. Will Russia invade Ukraine? Well, it's a question on everybody's mind these days because there's an imminent threat, but nobody knows. Maybe Putin knows, but nobody else has any idea. There's a lot of speculation and there's a lot of hysteria, but what is going to happen? And many people are talking about the fact, specifically in Western media, that this could spark a war in Ukraine, could spark a new world order. Is this really true? And can we trust China and can we trust Russia to actually not go together and help each other to create a new, maybe third war or third world war? I mean, that's the big question. Scary. Now, it all started at the Olympics, where the boycott of the Olympics by many Western countries like US, Canada, Australia, UK and so on made it very clear that they were not going to go to Beijing. And so Vladimir Putin had all the opportunity to have all the time with Xi Jinping that he wanted, and so he took advantage of that void. At the same time, he was building up a military arms or weapons around and soldiers around the border of Ukraine, which means that the stress level of the world went up drastically. I mean, incredibly, so that everybody was watching Ukraine and not watching as much the Olympics anymore, which is similar to what happened in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia. Now, what is all this about? Well, the reality is that there's been more and more talks about the fact that there's a joint statement that could be the start, the spark of a new world order. And so it's interesting to look at this joint statement. So all these hours that Xi Jinping and Putin talked was put into a long, long text. A text of almost 6,000 words. I've read all of it. I think it's very, very interesting. And what's clear to me when I read it is, I'm no Russia expert, but I do know something about China, and what I read is that this is very much drafted by China. It's drafted by China because China sees this opportunity to actually use Vladimir Putin, use Russia as a platform to talk to the world and say to the world, express to the world all the things they've been caring about for the past years. And so this statement is full of hopes of China, how they see the new world evolving and how they want to be part of it. So it's a positive thing, but at the same time, because it's part of this discussion in the war, many people are saying, wow, China is now supporting Russia into an invasion into Ukraine, and so this is a big thing, because now you have two authoritarian regimes against the liberal democracies of the West. Is this really what it's about? Well, if we go into detail, just the introduction, I mean, there's some short introduction first, which is talking about things we all know. This is about the profound transformation of society. It's about multipolarity. It's about globalization, about information society, cultural diversity. I mean, this is the new normal. We know this story. But then there's a sentence which is interesting in the beginning of this whole joint statement. It talks about a global governance architecture and a world order, and the transformation of that. And so the translation that we have in Western media specifically is that China and Russia wants to create this new world order. But they're actually just talking about the fact that there's a transformation, which is just a fact. It's not a statement of how they want to be involved. But then they also talk about a redistribution of the power into the world that has emerged. And so that is also reality. But you can read many things into that. If you read into that, we want to be part of that redistribution, or we want to redistribute it. That's very different than if you read it like, well, there's a redistribution because, for example, Asia is more prominent now. You also see that America is more challenging at days. Europe is losing some of its powers. I mean, Africa's coming up. I mean, there's many ways to read this. And of course, you read it like you want to read it. But the last sentence is where it makes the difference as well, because there it says that the international community has a growing demand for the leadership aimed at peaceful and gradual development. Now, nothing wrong about peaceful and gradual development, but that leadership and the fact that China and Russia said the international community has a growing demand. What that means is that today, and that's very clear, China's been saying this for years, America does not represent the international community on its own. And even with all its allies, I mean, there's still a few billion people on this planet that also have a say. And they are growing in importance. And that's what it's about. But the fact that they claim in that statement that the leadership is actually having to step up means that both Russia, Xi Jinping, and China, both of them, Xi Jinping and Putin, both of them actually want to step up and they want to be treated as equals. And that's what it's about. So I don't read in that anything that they want to create a new world order, but this is what Western journalists are reading into it. Now, if you go into the rest of the detail of this joint statement, I'm not going to go into all the details. It would take me hours, at least 2-3 hours, to explain every detail. So I'm going to go very fast. But there's a few points that are interesting, because there it clearly shows what is in the statement that shows the position of China towards Russia, towards the world, towards the change and the transformation of the global order. And first of all, they're putting themselves at the same level as the rest of the world by saying, we're a democracy. We are valuing universal rights and universal values. Our values are universal, and we want to abide according to universal human rights. I mean, these two things, angers many people in the West, because we see them as not a democracy, but an authoritarian regime, and we don't think that China and even Russia are abiding or are doing very well a good track record on human rights. But China and Russia have very clearly said that they are actually doing both. And they are a democracy because this is about improving the life of people, the well-being of people. And as long as the people believe that it's a democracy, well, it is a democracy. I think I'm going to make another video later about that, because it's a very interesting topic. So on the human rights, there's been lots of videos on YouTube already. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But the reality is that there's something to say about the fact that human rights are values that should be universal, but that there's realities different from country to country, and it's only by communicating and talking about it that we can understand where the difference lie and try to improve on both. And so that communication is not happening. They're also talking about the United Nations Sustainable Goals, which they both support, which is great. They want to support the climate change, of course, great. And then COVID-19, they want to tackle that with vaccines. And so they found themselves, or they found each other to help the world on all these things, which are positive change. So nothing strange into that. But the democracy and the human rights is an interesting topic. And I encourage you to read the statement for that. Now, in the next chapters, this is really going more about the interference. It's going about the systems. It's going about the military and the threat and all these things. And it could be a long, long story. But short story is that both of them want lasting security. They want some guarantees. They want a guarantee on the One China principle, and Russia is supporting that. China is supporting the lasting security on the borders, specifically the adjacent regions. And so they find each other in the common threat of the West coming closer and closer to their borders and not giving as many guarantees as they want. China very clearly drafted something about the double standards, because that's something China is very concerned about, that US specifically, America, has very high moral standards, but they're not abiding to their own standards, and then they're imposing it to other countries, or using things like human rights and democracy to actually, as something that should be universal, but China's not doing that, to actually fight China. And so this is a statement from China very, very clearly. Now, the other thing is about the threats. It's about the end of the Cold War since the early 90s, that news should not come back, and many people have been saying it is coming back because of China's rise. It's about NATO that should not expand further. A military buildup. China and Russia are both worried about that. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm not going to get into that debate, but this is part of this joint statement. And they also talk about these security guarantees. But one of the interesting things that was mentioned is a few points where they really attack America. And they say, you're telling about all these things, that we should not have our forces build up, but you do nothing else. That is what it's about, withdrawal of certain treaties, like the mid-range missiles or short-range missiles, where America just withdrew from that treatment. Why are they doing that? According to the statement, it's really because they want to re-establish this Cold War mentality and be prepared for another war. So maybe America is benefiting from a war in Ukraine. I mean, that's what you can read between the lines. The other thing is about the weapons. And I think that's something internationally universal. We're all talking about that. Every country wants to be part of it. But it's good that China and Russia, being the biggest space agencies after the US and Europe, are actually saying we don't want an arms race into space. We also don't want biological or chemical weapons, which is also something that is an international commitment to the United Nations. But the problem is that the US is not getting rid of these weapons that they've built in the past as fast as China and Russia would want. So there's tensions there. Of course, cyber attacks and data security, ICT, let's talk about that. And then the big thing is actually the nuclear power that should be going to zero. And this is an agreement globally, but somehow the US, with this new AUKUS deal, Australia, UK and the US deal, is now selling submarines, nuclear submarines to Australia into the backyard of China in the South China Sea. So this is all creating tensions. And so they talk a lot about all these weapons, that we should get rid of many of these weapons and have agreements so we don't create a third world war. We don't create a new Cold War. That is what the story is about. So it's about limiting the potential for risk for the future. And people aren't reading these parts, I feel. When it comes to the intentions of both countries, it's very clear that they're stepping up as responsible leaders within this agreement. Whether they are responsible or not, we can debate that forever, but the reality is that is what is put in the statement. They also want to go back to the post Second World War baseline. Russia wants that, and China as well. And I mean, that's going to be difficult anyhow, but somehow they don't want it to advance so that NATO has even more power over the rest of the world, because this is a military and attack against two countries, which China and Russia say it's an imaginary enemy that they're talking about. I don't know, we'll see in the next weeks if Russia invades Ukraine or not. What's interesting is two other things. Is the fact that in the statements it says that the friendship between Russia and China has no barriers, no limits. It means we can cooperate on everything. And that's interesting, because it could also be military. And that's something that has not been said much before. Of course, China is buying a lot of weapons from Russia, but I'm talking about a military alliance. But I don't think that's part of that deal, part of that statement, but it is a sign that there could be more military cooperation, and you see that coming already. And then there's the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that's been set up in 2002, which many people say this is a NATO of the East. It's actually not, because there's no army, there's no helping each other as countries, and this is like Russia, China, it's like all the stands like Kazakhstan and all the other stands, and then it's also India and Pakistan that are part of that SCO agreement. And this has to do with development and organization and cooperation, and not so much about military, but when needed, maybe there will be some common goals, but that's not how it's built. Anyway, what's interesting is that this joint statement clearly shows that the cooperation is about preventing something in the future and not about creating that future. And I think that's a difference that is not told very often. Now, what is the game plan, the geopolitical game plan behind this whole invasion of Ukraine and all the stories around? Well, for me, it's clear that Russia is playing chess. And they always do that geopolitically. And Vladimir Putin is like 3 steps ahead, and you don't really know if it's just to distract or confuse others, or it's really a step for the future. When it comes to the US, for me, that's clearly a poker game. They're playing geopolitically, like if they're dealt a good hand, then they play along. If they're dealt a bad hand, they're just bluffing. And so this is all a zero-sum game, and the winner takes all. And when it comes to the European Union, for me, it's like a football game, which means there's like 22 football players on the field, maybe a few on the bench. And most of these players, they just pass along the ball. And from time to time, somebody scores, but most of the time, they're more busy avoiding each other or passing to each other than actually scoring goals. When it comes to China, it's very much a go game geopolitically, and they're mostly concerned about being encircled by other countries and having the influence of other countries that actually would limit their own growth and potential. And so they're more concerned about encircling, and that's also why they have these initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative to actually make sure that they don't get encircled and they actually can circumvent other people that are trying to limit their potential. And so my thinking on this is that all 4 of them, we're all playing a different game. And because we're all playing a different game, we look at the other one's response from our own lens. And that makes it very difficult to predict, will there be a war, how will they react, what will China do, and so on. And so I think we need to look more internally than externally. But this is really a political Olympics right now. And there's not going to be any winner, whatever it is, but it will shake the world order somehow, even whether there's an invasion or not an invasion. Now, China clearly wants to avoid a war. That is their position when it comes to Ukraine, and it makes total sense. I mean, they don't want to de-escalate it, they don't like all the buzz around it, and Biden really talking about that there's an imminent war. This is like hysteria that they're talking with. Even the president of Ukraine is talking about that. They want to really go back to the table, diplomacy, and they want Putin to talk with all the others. But the talks don't end up too much more. And that is because the Russian demands are something that NATO and the US is not abiding or not agreeing to, but which China somehow understands. And China understands, and that's in that statement as well, that they oppose the enlargement of the NATO. And they wanted to stop. This is an old system after the Second World War against an enemy, which was the Soviet Union at that time. But right now, it's an imaginary enemy, according to China, very often. The Cold War approach, they're very worried about that. That's been popping up the last years very, very much, the new Cold War. And there's also security guarantees that they want from America, from the West, from NATO, and so on, which is not unreasonable. But of course, everything's in the details. But China understands that Russians' demand are actually not just because Putin wants more power, but there's actually about a threat towards their own sovereignty. And that's where they follow Russia. But that doesn't mean they want a war. They want to avoid a war at all cost. But if there would be a war, and if the West would actually have sanctions and decouple the Russia from SWIFT, for example, the currency, the international exchange system, then what's clear is that China will help Russia somehow. I mean, they will try to be as neutral as possible because they don't want this invasion and they think it's bad, but at the same time, they're not going to let go of that friend and say, now you're on your own and you figure it out. Because they don't want the Western powers to become even more powerful by not helping Russia. Now, I see Russia and China as very different. I mean, you could call them peers. Don't call them alliances because, I mean, they're not on the same level. And I don't mean different level. I just mean they have different backgrounds. They have different backgrounds, from history. I mean, during the Cold War, it was a roller coaster between China and Russia. And sometimes they were friends, sometimes they were enemies. And America played a role in that as well. And so it's very difficult to call them great friends and alliances like we have the alliances in the West. They're not helping each other per se against something else, but they feel the same common threat. And that same threat is really what keeps them become better and better friends. Now, at the same time, they share a border, 1,000 kilometers in the the northeast of China. And so what that means is that they can't get rid of each other. I mean, Russia is far away from America and China is far away from the European Union, but they are stuck with each other. So somehow they have to get along. The good news is that they're very complementary, which means that Russia can give what China needs, like energy. It can give them weapons if needed for military actions or for defending themselves. It can also give them a lot of agriculture products. Ukraine can do the same. And so that's where they find each other. China, on the other hand, is giving the world, as a factory of the world, all the products that Russia needs. And China is the biggest trading partner of Russia. Russia is only the 10th number trading partner of China. But same, it means everything gets shipped to Russia, electronics, machinery, all these things, because Russia needs that as well. So they find each other economically, and that also means that military, now they also find each other, not because they want to create a big military together, but because they have a common threat. Now, when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine, if that would happen, and I truly hope we won't ever see that, is that China would have a terrible headache of it. I mean, trade is okay with Ukraine. I mean, they're doing a lot of trade, specifically on iron ore and uranium and lots of things that they're importing, but there's a lot of agriculture products as well. It's important to know that Ukraine is actually the biggest rural or arable land in Europe. And so they could feed like 600 million people, which for China is quite important. But that's a potential for the future. Right now, they haven't tapped much into that. It's still a much smaller trading partner than Russia. They're not investing much into Ukraine as well. The FDI is very low into Ukraine. So if there would be a war, it wouldn't be a big loss, but it's a loss for the future. What's important is the geopolitical strategical position of Ukraine for the Belt and Road, which connects China with Europe. It's in the middle of it, and it's very important. And so if there would be a war, that would be very, very bad for the Belt and Road in itself, because then Ukraine is a way for China to not have to pass through Russia to go to Europe. Sovereignty would be the biggest issue, because China doesn't want any countries to invade any other countries, which makes sense. They haven't done that themselves, and they don't want others to do that also. So if they would support the Russian invasion, then how would they explain that they want to actually keep Taiwan part of China? I mean, then America could say whatever they want. So they don't want that. They don't want an invasion into Ukraine, because it would be a huge headache to explain the sovereignty position that China has. And then there's the sanctions, of course. If it would happen that Russia gets the sanctions, the chances are real that this would have a spillover effect on China, and China would get new sanctions, not just by America, but also by Europe or the European Union. And that's something they don't want. So China doesn't want a war. They don't want any more headaches, and that would be terrible for China also. Now, they would not have a huge effect economically, because Ukraine doesn't represent the same as many other countries, but still. The thing that many people talk about is the fact that Taiwan could be the blueprint, or Ukraine could be the blueprint for an invasion in Taiwan. And some people are saying that they're going to do it at the same time. Ukraine invasion, Taiwan invasion, same time. I don't believe any of these stories, because this is not the position of China. China wants to reunite Taiwan with the mainland. They don't want to invade it, and use Ukraine as a blueprint is not the position. But of course, however the United Nations, however the EU and America react on an invasion of Ukraine could tell something about the reaction on an invasion of Taiwan, in case that Taiwan calls out for independency. So I don't believe that. The other thing that people are saying, that it's a distraction, because if there's a war in Ukraine, then people are not going to talk about China that much, and so China can continue to evolve. And I don't buy any of that, because I mean, they had that with COVID as well, and that doesn't really make the difference. It's not because we have our problems somewhere else that we don't look at China or don't see them as the bad guys. It would not be a distraction. I don't believe that. When it comes about control, people are saying that if there would be a war, then Russia would be controlled more even by China, or dependent more on China. Trade was at 140 billion last year. Xi Jinping and Putin agreed to increase that to 200 billion this year and up to 250 billion US dollars by 2025. So there's clearly a growth of the cooperation economically and the trade economically. So it's natural. So whether the Ukraine gets invaded or not, I don't see a difference personally on China having more control over Russia. I do, on the other hand, feel that if there would be an invasion, that China would have a lot more headaches than they actually want to. And so then they talk about this new world order. And so for me, this is not about a new world order. It's really about the new world order that is being created naturally. And as there are more tensions everywhere in the world, and America is playing a role in that as well as the European Union, by increasing the tensions, China does, Russia for sure, as we see now, then that order is getting reshaken or redistributed, and that is true. But I don't see how China and Russia wants to set up a military alliance to create a new world order and be in charge as a hegemony, just like America is today. I don't see that happen. For me, all these things are fake news, but there's a lot of stories around. For me, what's real is the fact that the world order is changing. And China is playing a more prominent role, as is Asia, as is Russia trying to do that now with the help of China and Asia, and you're seeing the Asia continent increase. And so for me, China's playing a game of Go. And so for them, this statement, this joint statements and everything that's happening now is really about making sure that the military buildup of the West and the military power that the West has doesn't increase much more. And there's a more distribution that is evenly both military, economically, politically and culturally, so that the whole world can actually improve together. And so whether we can trust China or not, I think we can trust China on the fact that they will not support Russia to invade Ukraine. I think we can trust China on the fact that if Russia would invade Ukraine, that China would maybe help them out a little bit, but wouldn't go very far in helping them. So Russia would be pretty much on their own as well. But that is just my opinion. Put in the comments what you think your opinion is. We can have a debate on it, but I don't see a new world order being created by China and Russia together. What do you think? See you next week for another episode on Pascal's China Lens.